I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, President Trump takes off on his first official trip overseas, but leaves behind a White House in damage control. We'll analyze the potential impact of all the drama on tech. Plus, Uber backs into yet another PR nightmare, this time the fury coming from within. We'll dig into that and the latest on the court battle with Waymo. And Roku's path to household TV streaming domination. We'll get the inside track from CEO Anthony Wood later this hour. But first, to our lead. Donald Trump is embarking on his first international trip as president while controversies continue to swirl at home. His 8-day odyssey will take him to the Middle East and Europe, where he'll meet the Saudi king, Pope Francis, and newly elected French President Emmanuel Macron. But it was barely wheels up for Air Force One when news reports surfaced over the firing of FBI Director James Comey. The New York Times reports that President Trump told Russian officials that firing Comey relieved pressure on him and the investigation into his campaign's ties with Russia, reportedly going on to say that Comey was crazy and, quote, a nut job. For the latest, we're joined by Bloomberg News reporter Shannon Pettypiece live from the White House. Shannon, what's the reaction to this latest revelation?
Well, the White House is pretty much empty at this point. So unlike past revelations that I could have told you about doors slamming and people scurrying into meetings, right now they're all on planes. But if they were hoping for a couple quiet days before the Comey testimony on Wednesday and a budget coming out on Tuesday, I think this is now going to be the question that all the reporters are asking on Saturday when they land, on throughout Sunday. Who knows what the weekend has in store? So it just sort of changes the agenda from the things they want to be talking about to the things that are being talked about back home. And again, as they go to meet with all these foreign leaders, you obviously know that, foreign leaders and foreign officials are watching these news reports very closely as well. So, this is all things that are going to be the top of their mind, too.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer released a statement saying the investigation would have always continued, and obviously the termination of Comey would not have ended it. Once again, the real story is that our national security has been undermined by the leaking of private and highly classified conversations. Talk to us about what we're expecting when it comes to the home front over the next few days. We know potentially a new FBI director could be named at any moment.
Yeah, and so it's interesting you mentioned that statement. So, that part of the statement was sort of his defense. But earlier in the statement, Sean Spicer basically acknowledged that Comey was fired because of the Russia investigation, because of politicizing the Russia investigation, which Trump had kind of said in a television interview. He had said, but remember, the initial story about this Comey firing was supposed to be that it was based off this memo from the Deputy Attorney General. Then the president said he already knew that he was going to fire him going into it because he was a grandstander and a showboater. And then this statement from Sean Spicer says it was because of this Russia investigation. They didn't like how he was politicizing it. So the story keeps evolving over Comey. So, yes, to get back to the domestic front, Wednesday we're expected to hear testimony from Comey. That will obviously huge headlines that day, the day leading up to it, and likely the days afterwards. And again, all sort of going on as the president is in the Middle East, as he's meeting with European leaders and trying to develop these very new relationships, for this young presidency.
Specifically, Shannon, the statement that you're referring to from Sean Spicer, he says, by grandstanding and politicizing the investigation into Russia's actions, James Comey created unnecessary pressure on our ability to engage and negotiate with Russia. To what extent do we expect that these issues here at home are going to overshadow what is happening abroad?
I doubt that nothing else is going to come out this week. So I think the domestic issues at home are going to be the issues abroad. And if you're a foreign leader sitting across from President Trump right now, you're going to have all these things in the back of your mind. You're going to have in the back of your mind that he reportedly leaked intelligence to, intelligence given to him to the Russians, that he made these remarks to the Russians in the meeting about how this would relieve pressure from the investigation around Russia by getting rid of Comey. You're going to have in the back of your mind that he tweeted about potentially having tapes of the conversation. So all of these things, and deciding, can I trust this person? Is this going to be a friend, a foe, an ally? What can I tell them? Is it going to leak to the media? All those domestic issues happening are going to be on foreign leaders' minds.
All right, our Bloomberg News reporter Shannon Pettypiece live from the White House. Shannon, thanks so much. A busy weekend likely ahead. Let's get more perspective now on the Trump administration and how chaos in the White House could impact Silicon Valley. Here with me now in the studio, Roger McNamee, co-founder of Elevation Partners and my guest host for the hour. Roger, of course, Silicon Valley came out widely against Trump. What's been the reaction over the last several weeks and months as these, one after another, revelation has unfolded?
Well, to be clear, the stock market has had no problem with any of this.
Exactly, and especially not tech stocks.
Especially not for tech stocks. So at some level, you know, people in Silicon Valley are very happy with what's happened to their stock valuations. Where I think the challenge comes in, and I think this is huge, is that, you know, with all of the focus on fake news, there's been a failure to appreciate that the real challenge from the Russians came with manipulating public opinion around things that people may have believed, reinforcing them so strongly that it caused some people not to vote and other people to get into various emotional states that weren't healthy. And the thing we don't want to lose sight of is that is still going on. There was a report out this morning about the Russians putting bots into Twitter, again, to influence public opinion in the United States. And I think the tech industry has, to this point at least, gotten a free pass on all of this stuff. And we're really talking about the folks who are in the persuasion business. So this is Google, this is Facebook, to a lesser extent Twitter, but others, you know, who are in that ecosystem, who are in the persuasion business, their tools are being exploited by unfriendly people in ways that are not helpful. And this isn't the result of a strategy by any of these companies. This is an unintended consequence of an incredibly successful business model.
And as you say, the stock prices of Google and Facebook, for example, continue to rise higher and higher. What are their responsibilities when it comes to fake news, when it comes to these concerns about tech addiction?
So I don't worry so much about fake news. I think the fake news thing is a convenient way of distracting attention from the real problem, which is that the techniques of persuasion that are necessary to make an advertising model work, those techniques of persuasion aren't just between Facebook and its users, but any advertiser uses Facebook. And bad things have happened, many of them unintended. And my simple point here is, let's have a conversation about it. I don't pretend to have the answer. And I know these are good people. You know, this isn't like, oh my gosh, we have these bad guys in a castle throwing thunderbolts at the people. I don't think it works that way. I think this is a model that when these companies were small, couldn't do any harm to anybody. But when you have 1.9 billion members in Facebook, as Facebook does, or a billion in Instagram, or 1.4 billion in Google, or 1.3 billion in YouTube, you essentially have the influence of a very large country, or in the case of Facebook, several very large countries. And at that level, there is responsibility, and I just want to have a conversation about what the limits of that responsibility might be.
Well, how does this play out in a very highly politicized and polarized environment? So, for example, whenever I tweet anything about Trump on Twitter, a neutral story,
sure,
or a factual story, I get rained down on by the Twitter trolls.
I agree. I mean, this is what's so difficult about it, right? Is that people's positions have become hardened, not because they're bad people, but because the tools of persuasion have been so effective at essentially reinforcing existing beliefs and making them less flexible. And I don't have the answer. I just want to have the debate. This isn't about good people versus bad people. This is about a technology that began with the best of intentions that has inadvertently put us in a place where we don't have control of it anymore. And the people who do have control of it don't have as much control as they thought they had, right?
There have been a lot of concerns about Trump's impact on the tech agenda, whether it's immigration or net neutrality. Do you see those things actually coming to fruition?
I think that the immigration issue is a huge problem. They've already taken steps. I think the one part of this administration that has worked really effectively has been the Department of Justice. And it's been doing it by attempting to take us back to a time when we were shall we say, less balanced, less fair country. And you know, I think in very awful ways, we are hurting ourselves as well as the people who are affected with immigration status issues. You know, I think it's terrible for the economy. It's going to be bad for the agricultural economy. It's going to be terrible for the tech economy. And you've already seen a big impact on college applications and grad school applications from people coming in from the outside. You've seen a huge impact on tourism. And for what? What possible benefit are we getting from this? And so that part scares the heck out of me, because this country, our culture should be better than that. And our economy, we have to stop pretending that our economy will be better if we take these amazing people out of it.
A lot of these tech giants were also counting on a big corporate tax cut, potentially a big tax holiday on bringing cash home from overseas. There's now some uncertainty around that and around the entire agenda. What does that mean for tech?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think the tech companies needed to repatriate cash. In fact, I know they didn't. I also don't know that they were counting on it. I think there were short-term shareholders who were hoping to get a big windfall from it. I think at the end of the day, whether it happens or doesn't happen is a less an issue for tech than the other really direct impacts on employees and on customers and frankly on trade. I mean, to the extent that global markets are jeopardized in any way, that's terrible for tech. These are global companies, and they operate, not just in the United States, but in China and in Mexico and in Canada and Africa and Europe and Asia.
So we have yet to see these potential terrible consequences.
Well, I would actually argue that you see the beginnings of it. When we have graduate student applications being down dramatically, when you have tourism down dramatically, those are direct impacts of these policies, which will ripple through to the entire economy. Maybe it won't affect iPhone sales on the first day, but eventually somebody is going to have a problem with this behavior, and they're going to have a response. And that response may be something we really don't like, and then you're in a trade war. And who benefits from that? Nobody.
Well, every day brings something new. We're certainly going to be following Trump as he travels around the globe over the next several days. Roger McNamee of Elevation Partners, you are sticking with me, my guest host for the hour. An update now on Toshiba's sale of its chip unit. Broadcom and a group led by private equity firm KKR are emerging as the two leading bidders. This according to people familiar with the matter. However, the talks are still fluid, and Toshiba may not decide on a buyer before its shareholder meeting scheduled in June. Coming up, another day, another PR crisis for Uber as drivers of the ride-hailing app cry foul over fares. We'll have all the details next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Bitcoin continues its record run. The cryptocurrency crossed $1,900 for the first time ever, marking its fifth day of gains. Bitcoin has more than doubled in value since the beginning of the year amid global political uncertainty and increased interest in Asia. But skeptics have said there may be a bubble in the making, as it has repeatedly broken records without showing any signs of slowing. Another week, another problem for Uber. Drivers of the ride-hailing app are voicing their anger over the widening gap between what they're paid and what customers are charged. This on top of new developments in the startup's court battle with Waymo. For more now, we're joined by our Bloomberg Tech Uber reporter Eric Newcomer, who's been very busy over the last several months. Still with us, Roger McNamee, co-founder of Elevation Partners. Okay, the pricing story. What's happening now?
Right. Okay, it's sort of complicated. We have upfront fares where riders just get the price. We moved away from the metered model, but it was still fundamentally rooted in time and distance. Now Uber's saying we can do a lot of machine learning calculations, figure out what you're willing to pay, and we'll charge you it. Now, it's not just like, oh, what's Emily willing to pay? It's we're going to bucket people out and say, you're going from here to there. What are people willing to pay on that route? So they're calling it route-based pricing. But the idea is we're moving to a world where Uber can say, what are people willing to pay? We'll charge them that.
But ultimately, are customers paying more and drivers getting less?
Right. It's also an opportunity for Uber to take more of the fare for themselves. Some of it gets reinvested in bonuses, but it does seem like a move to take more of the money rather than give it to drivers.
Look, anecdotally, I ride Lyft and Uber a lot. I always talk to the drivers, and every single driver that I speak with prefers Lyft over Uber. Every single driver. These are just my rides, but they're just not happy with the way Uber treats them, and I just wonder if they can get over these issues.
Emily, I think that Uber has a culture that is so deeply flawed that I wonder how they come back. They have the scale, and they have a lot of cash on hand, but the way they invest the cash and their day-to-day business practices are just horrible. And my partners are invested in Uber, and I totally understand why, but I passed on it because morally, I can't, I come from a different place, and that's a judgment for me. Nobody else has to take that seriously, but for me, I look at them, I just can't go there.
For example, small issue, the driver that I was riding with yesterday, a Lyft driver, had switched entirely over to Lyft because he said Uber wouldn't reimburse him for the tolls. It was like some glitch in the system. He'd cross a bridge multiple times and they just wouldn't pay him back for the tolls. I don't understand how there's any excuse for that.
Well, the way I would look at this is I think in the long run, if you treat your most important asset, which in their case, the drivers, really badly, karma is going to get you. And I have noticed this with friends. When we are at an event and people are waiting for a thing, they're all using Lyft now. But interestingly enough, one of the reasons they're using Lyft now is because it comes faster, because there are drivers who aren't responding to the Uber calls, and that's local here in the Bay Area. And I think if there's an issue for Uber in the Bay Area, that's really bad.
Yeah.
Well, we've known that Lyft had better market share in the Bay Area than other parts of the country. So I wonder, is this just a Bay Area thing, or is this happening across the country?
Lyft thinks it's gaining market share sort of all around the United States. Uber's, obviously fighting back. At the end of the day, Uber still holds the majority of drivers, rides. I mean, and I hear the same thing. Drivers will say, I prefer Lyft. They prefer the Lyft brand, but they still tend to go where they're going to make the money. And I think Uber knows that with this sort of pricing, they are still they're redirecting the money to bonuses and other incentives to keep drivers on their platform. Some of these bonuses are like, you need to drive 100 rides for us. So they're ways of locking in the drivers through the compensation to keep them on their platform rather than going to Lyft.
Roger, how does this play out? I was speaking with Fred Wilson, the venture capitalist, earlier this week. He said it's clear ride-sharing is not going to be winner-take-all, and Uber is grappling with that. Is Uber still a $70 billion company? I
don't think it was ever a $70 billion company, except in the minds of the people writing those checks. To me, the challenge in this business in the long run is to establish a profit model that justifies any high level of valuation. And if you sit there and think about it, you apply a Google price earnings multiple on this, they have to have net income of what, 5-6 billion. If you apply an Apple model, they got to be in double digit.
Not negative 2.8 billion.
Right. And so they're nowhere near where they got to get if they want to have from a terminal value point of view. And again, that price is being paid by people today, and more power to them. They may see something that I'm missing. But when we get onto this whole issue of driverless cars, one of the challenges that I think Uber has faced is they are always trying to do more things today than their income statement can handle. And I think if you're an investor, the dream of making all those big ideas work has got to be powerful, but at the same time, the probability of making them work has been pretty low.
That's exactly right. And that's how Uber thinks about it. They say Amazon made all their big bets in cereal. They did one after another and sort of proved it to investors. We've been able to raise all this money. We're going to do them all at once. We're going to build Eats. We're going to invest in self-driving cars. And so we're going to make those investments. And then, we're going to be a huge company, but it's risky.
Right.
Yeah.
Look at the balance sheet. Okay, Eric Newcomer, our Bloomberg Tech reporter, thanks so much. Roger McNamee of Elevation Partners. I can tell you want to say more. We're going to have to talk about it in the break. Stick with me. Coming up, after selling Virgin America, what is Richard Branson's next act? We'll hear from the British tech investor in an exclusive interview next. This is Bloomberg. We had such a spirited conversation about Uber in the break. We're still here with Bloomberg Tech's Eric Newcomer, who covers Uber, and Roger McNamee of Elevation Partners. We were talking about Waymo. And first, Eric, I want you to give us a quick update on what's happening with Anthony Lewandowski.
Real quick, Uber basically sent a letter to Lewandowski saying, you have to testify in our civil suit, even though you're pleading the Fifth Amendment, or we'll fire you. And that's not that big of a surprise. They need to show that they want him to testify in their defense.
This is an ongoing, huge court battle with Waymo over self-driving cars. And Roger, you think that this is a really big deal?
I think it's a huge deal. And the reason I think it's a huge deal is that I think self-driving cars are further out than the conventional wisdom, and as a consequence will not come soon enough to save Uber, and they're much better off taking the money they would invest in it and buying cars from some other company that makes them. And just as in China, where the great move was to get 10% of Didi, which is the biggest Chinese ride-sharing company, and then exit the market, saving billions of dollars, I think exiting self-driving cars will be a profoundly positive thing if and when Uber chooses to do it.
But they already have self-driving cars on the road that they're testing out.
No, yes, so what? I mean, the path to self-driving cars that can actually be the core of the fleet is still maybe a decade or 15 years away. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but we have to change the way roads work. We have to change the way cities work. And none of that groundwork's been laid.
And they have two humans in the front seat. It's all these edge cases, how they get to know drivers where they actually change the economics of the business. And I agree, the distance is out. I'd say the Uber defense is just that they need this story of someday there will be self-driving, there's growth there. They definitely internally, they think they need to make the human driver's business profitable, a moneymaker. But the idea is that self-driving gives them this lift story that at some point we're going to have this new line of business that's even better, and you should keep investing on that.
But it also causes the risk of bankruptcy to go from non-existent to very material. And, you know, again, I have no crystal ball here, but I'm looking at this and I'm going, I think they're nuts. I think at the beginning they should have bought cars. They should have spec'd a car that was literally the same for everybody. Like if you think about Southwest Airlines, every car is, or every plane is exactly the same. They should have done this like a server, spec'd it, bid them for 50% under the cost it would be in the consumer market, put them on the streets with keyless entry, give the drivers the key, and own the car, own the insurance, do all that stuff. That would have been my recommendation. They chose not to do that. They chose to do self-driving instead. I don't think self-driving is the answer. And I agree, it's going to be hard for the valuation when they exit that, but that's better than going broke.
All right, well, you heard it here first. Roger McNamee always has some provocative predictions. Roger McNamee sticking with me, our Bloomberg Tech reporter, Eric Newcomer.
I'll really go this time.
You're really getting off the set. Okay, coming up, the cord cutting continues and competition heats up. Can Roku compete with the likes of Apple TV? We'll talk to Anthony Wood, Roku CEO, next.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis says President Trump has issued an accelerated campaign to aggressively combat Islamic State.
He directed a tactical shift from shoving ISIS out of seized locations in an attrition fight to surrounding the enemy in their strongholds so we can annihilate ISIS. The intent is to prevent the return home of escaped foreign fighters.
2 car bombs in Baghdad have killed 11 people and wounded at least 20 others. The Associated Press cites officials who say 4 police officers are among the dead. The attack comes as Iraqi forces, backed by the U.S.-led coalition, move in on one of the last neighborhoods held by Islamic State in Mosul, Iraq's second-largest city. Saudi Arabia is the first stop on the president's first official trip overseas, where preparations are being made for his visit in Riyadh. The Trump administration plans to announce $110 billion in advanced military equipment sales and training to Saudi Arabia this weekend. Sweden's top prosecutor has dropped an investigation into a rape claim against Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder who in 2012 took refuge in Ecuador's embassy in London to escape extradition to Sweden, called the decision a victory for himself and the UN human rights system, but he said it has taken a toll.
In prison, under house arrest, and almost 5 years here in this embassy without sunlight. 7 years without charge. Why my children grew up without me. That is not something that I can forgive.
Assange might still face extradition to the United States. UK party leaders spent the day campaigning ahead of the general election on June 8th. Prime Minister Theresa May addressed Scottish supporters in Edinburgh, urging them to vote for the Conservatives. Main rival and Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn campaigned in Bedford. Liberal Democrats leader Tim Farron also campaigned in Bedford. Iranians were at the polls to vote on a new president. 4 candidates remain, including incumbent moderate Hassan Rouhani and hardliner Ebrahim Raisi. Iran's first presidential election since the 2015 nuclear accord drew surprisingly large numbers, with some waiting hours in line to cast their votes. The man accused of driving his car onto one of the busiest sidewalks in the U.S. and mowing down pedestrians has been charged with murder and 20 counts of attempted murder. New York City police say the Navy veteran drove 3 blocks in Times Square, hitting about 24 people. I'm Mark Crumpton in New York.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. It is a topic we continue to talk about, cord cutting. Consumers have more TV options than ever before, giving the media industry no choice but to embrace the shift to streaming. And as more platforms pop up, the more consumers choose to watch content this way. Roku found that consumers streamed about 9 billion hours of television in 2016, a 70% increase from the year prior. The company also hit over $400 million in revenue last year. Joining us now, Anthony Wood, Roku CEO, and still with us, Elevation Partners co-founder Roger McNamee. Anthony, the industry has embraced streaming finally. It took a little while, but why choose Roku over Apple or Amazon or Google?
Well, I mean, Roku is the #1 streaming platform in the United States. We have over 14 million active customers, and that's growing 40+% every year. And you know, we stream over 1 billion hours a month, and that's growing 60+%. So why choose us? We have the best products at the best price with the most content.
Roger, you're bullish on streaming.
I am, very.
But do you see consolidation in this business?
No, well, not at Anthony's level. To me, the really interesting question is you've had this massive proliferation of content creators, which has been a boon for the industry. I mean, you know, you look at this and people talk about the golden age of television. And that golden age of television is not about network TV. It's about the services that things like Roku stream. And I don't know what causes that to end, because the success of it so far has been, I mean, wildly above the threshold that would be necessary to keep people doing it. And you know, you've had new entrants like Netflix, like Amazon coming into that space, and it wouldn't be shocking to see other new entrants come in. So I look at this, and the question to me is, what is ultimately the penetration of this stuff around the country? I don't know, but if it's, you know, if we're even a quarter of the way to maximum penetration, I'd be really surprised, because it feels like something that's going to be more or less ubiquitous at some point.
What is penetration?
Well, I think every household is going to stream. That's how people will watch TV.
Yeah.
It is the future of TV, and there will be operating systems in your television just like there are operating systems in your phone.
So what does that mean for cable companies?
Well, it means the way content is being distributed is changing completely. You know, half of Roku customers don't have a cable subscription. You can, and those that do, they can get it on their Roku. You can download a Xfinity app on your Roku TV, and you don't have to have a cable box. So what it means is that the way television is being distributed is changing from sort of quasi-monopolies of cable boxes from satellite and cable companies to operating systems like Roku. And that change is happening very quickly.
Well, the cable guys, the thing with the cable guys, remember, they are the largest provider of internet access. So they're not, you know, their internet business is so much more important than the cable TV business to them today, that at some level they love what's going on here, because they can actually put Xfinity or their apps onto these platforms.
But they're making so much more money on the cable part of it. They bundle everything together, but they're charging so much more.
Well, their biggest business is broadband. And what's happening is that the internet is causing a lot of competition that didn't used to exist. There's a lot more choices for customers, and the margin actually in the distribution of video is shrinking, and customers are getting better values.
They also own a lot of content. I mean, you look at Comcast's portfolio of content that they own, it's really significant. And you look at this and you go, these guys have hedged their bets, frankly, brilliantly. And so I look at this and go, are people going to consume more video and pay more for it 10 years from now than they're paying for it today? I think the answer to that is probably yes. Are they going to change the way they get it? Almost certainly.
Consumers are watching more television. They get more choices. They get to watch what they want to watch. They don't have to watch ads if they don't want to watch ads. That's what we're seeing.
What does this mean for companies like Netflix and Amazon? These are companies that are spending billions of dollars on original content. Can they keep it up?
Well, who knows? But so far, they have. And, you know, the failure rate when you first start up is normally very high. That is to say, once you get experience, in principle, you should be better at doing something. And what's fascinating here is that they both hit the ground and didn't make any tragic errors out of the chute, and they each had monster wins right out of the chute. And so I look at this and go, I think the burden of proof is on those who do not expect them to be successful. I also think at the margin, it kind of doesn't matter for his business. All it matters is that people make more content, and that they make content that's looking for distribution channels other than the, you know, essentially network television and the cable package.
And lastly, what about Apple? I mean, we've been hearing for so long Apple was coming with something special for TV. Is this it. We know they're dabbling in original content. Is it the Apple TV box?
I have no idea. I happen to love Apple TV as a customer because, you know, I'm old enough that I need simplicity of the user interface and the connection and all that stuff. I like the portability. Plus, I had a large investment in iTunes product, which made me an above average customer for them, but you probably have a different point of view.
Yeah, I mean, Apple TV has the smallest market share of any of the streaming players on the market. The #1 streaming players are all in the sub $50 category. For example, the Roku Express, $29, is selling like gangbusters.
Yeah, I mean, I probably have half of Apple's market share in California in my house.
But the way most customers are going to get their streaming platform, their operating system, it's going to be built into the TV that they buy. Roku, you know, last year, 1 in 8 TVs sold, smart TVs sold in the U.S. were powered by Roku's OS. This year, 1 in 5 smart TVs sold will be powered by Roku's OS, and eventually that's going to be, you know, every TV is going to come with an operating system built in.
Is there an economic model in putting the OS into the TV for you, or is that a loss leader that basically powers up the rest of the business?
Yeah, so we gain market share by distributing players and license the TV, but that's not how we make money. Our business model is we're an advertising and content distribution platform. I mean, one of the big things about streaming that most people don't realize is the world of advertising is completely changing. You know, instead of Nielsen ratings, we're moving to internet-based technologies, data, machine learning, targeted ads, and that's a big part of what we do, is building that platform.
And what percentage of the people who get a smart TV activate the Roku that's in it?
Well, it's the highest activation rate. I mean, it's over 85%.
85%. Wow, that's really
impressive.
That's really impressive.
All right. Anthony Wood, CEO of Roku, thanks for stopping by. Roger McNamee, you are sticking with me. I want to get to a story that we are monitoring. A passenger was restrained by law enforcement on an American Airlines flight from LA to Honolulu for putting a laptop near the cockpit door. This coming to us from airline officials. All of this happening on American Airlines. This passenger was restrained by law enforcement. American Airlines Flight 31 from LA to Honolulu. We're going to continue to follow that story. Coming up, the WannaCry malware hack attack spread throughout the globe this week at an unprecedented pace. But was the ransomware payoff worth it for the hackers? We will discuss in the Week in Tech. The WannaCry cyber attack started in the UK 1 week ago and spread across the globe like wildfire, infecting more than 300,000 computers in 150 countries. While the events over the last 7 days are concerning, the payoff for the hackers has been less than impressive. Earlier, I spoke with Tom Giles, our Bloomberg Tech editor, and Mark Gurman, a reporter at Bloomberg Technology, about WannaCry and the other tech stories that grabbed our attention this week.
People either already protectively downloaded the patch, the ones who didn't learned a very valuable, very important lesson. Other people, they were able to apply it later, they were able to, or they just, maybe you gave up your data that they were holding ransom, or you did the smart thing and you backed it up. Even if you didn't download the patch, you had it in the cloud, you had it somewhere else, so you can ditch your, you can ditch your computer.
Now, Symantec claims they stopped 20-some million of these attacks. We actually had the CEO of Symantec on the show. Take a listen to what he had to say about the problem with ransom hack attacks in particular.
So this problem is rife. It is a way of making money for criminals, and it is definitely an effect on the enterprise, but also on consumers and their sort of digital safety.
So again, not that much money collected, but again, concerns, back on heightened alert about security in general. Do we know more about where this came from? There were reports earlier in the week that there were ties potentially to North Korea.
Right, yeah. So what they've said is they said this one in particular has certain parallels to former attacks that came from North Korea. Originally, some researchers were pointing the finger at Russia, so it seems to have shifted a little bit more toward Asia on this one. In the end, it wasn't a very sophisticated attack. That shouldn't give anybody lull anybody into a false sense of security, though, because they're going to come back and they're going to be more sophisticated in the future.
I want to talk about Google I/O now, Mark. You were in attendance, announcements about, voice assistants, announcements about Google Home, Android. It seemed nothing too surprising. What was the biggest announcement as far as you're concerned?
The biggest announcement was the continued push of the assistant into other places in your home, in your pocket, in your car.
And also now on the iPhone.
And also now on the iPhone. And we'll get to that. But first, I want to say, I don't think they knocked it out of the park. And I think they really needed to knock it out of the park this year versus other years.
So why not?
Well, we have Apple's developer conference, WWDC, in June. This is going to be a very significant year for Apple. We reported that there's lots of announcements in store for the conference, from new laptops to new mobile software, new Mac software. There's going to be a new iPhone, one of the biggest iPhone update launch cycles ever this fall. And Google right now could have really taken advantage of this Apple lull. They haven't really done much besides a cheaper iPad and a red iPhone since last year, and they didn't.
I actually did ask Hiroshi Lockheimer, the head of Android, about the coming iPhone redesign. Take a listen to what Hiroshi had to say.
It's an exciting time to be a consumer because there's just so much going on, so many manufacturers working on interesting innovations. And so I think it's a good thing, you know, and it keeps the Android manufacturers on their toes, and it makes them work harder, it makes us work harder. So I think it's great.
A very magnanimous answer there, if you will.
Well, I think one of the things that stood out for me was this idea that they really do want to take AI and put it everywhere. They're taking it and pushing it deeper and deeper into their cloud computing offering, which is crucial right now given how far ahead AWS is. What Google wants is more businesses, more small businesses, more startups to come to them instead of AWS. So the more smart you make your cloud computing offering sound, the more you weave AI into it, the more that has the potential to get startups excited about maybe we'll go to AWS and sorry, maybe we'll go to Google and not AWS.
Quickly, Mark, is it going to work?
We'll see. I mean, the iPhone, going on the iPhone on the Surface, that's hundreds of millions of new people that could use the Assistant, see Google ads, use Google services, but we have this story detailing why this is not great for iPhone users. Right now, if you want a voice assistant on the iPhone, stick to Siri.
Quick check-in on earnings. Cisco stock dropped on the back of a disappointing forecast. They're saying they're cutting 1,100 jobs. Yep,
that's on top of several thousand earlier. This shift, they got to make this shift. Everybody's doing it. Shift into subscriptions, into services delivered via software. These big routers and servers, companies are not investing millions of dollars in these like they were before. They're really depending on a new system. Cisco has to revamp things. It's a big ship, hard to turn that around.
Alibaba also beating revenue estimates for 6 straight quarters, but there's concern about profits and there's concern about what's going on in the broader China market. That's right. That's right. The growth is just not happening at the same level in China. That affects Alibaba. They're reaching out to millions of consumers across that country, and if those consumers are less confident about their prospects, about growth, about the economy, they're going to spend less on Alibaba. What Alibaba's doing to compensate for it? Investing lots in cloud computing and entertainment, like their big U.S. counterpart, Amazon, doing a lot of the same things. So that's going to hurt the bottom line. The more you invest in new things to keep your customers more sticky, the more that's going to, crimp margin and affect how you're spending your money. That was Bloomberg Technology's Tom Giles and our very own Mark Gurman. Serial entrepreneur Sir Richard Branson has hinted that he may get back into the U.S. airline business. It comes amid a royalties tussle over the Virgin America brand with Alaska Air, which bought the airline in December for $2.6 billion. Our editor-at-large Corey Johnson sat down with Branson. The Virgin Group founder spoke about the difficulties of the transaction and also signaled something bigger on the horizon.
They've said that they'll continue to use Virgin America for another, I think, 18 months, something like that. And then they're going to merge all the planes into one brand, Alaska Airlines.
But don't they have a responsibility to continue to pay Virgin for the duration of that contract?
Yeah, until 2030, they carry on paying royalties. Unless we decide to start another airline, and so we'll see what happens.
Is that something you'd be willing to do?
Watch this space.
Now we're continuing to monitor this story about a possible security breach on American Airlines Flight 31. That flight from LA to Honolulu, we now know, has landed safely. This according to an airline spokesperson. A passenger was restrained on that flight, we're told, by law enforcement and flyers, other passengers, after putting a laptop near the cockpit door. As the plane landed, law enforcement rushed in. We're told that passenger has been restrained. American Airlines says it's in touch with federal law enforcement right now, and we'll continue to bring you any headlines on that as we have them. This is Bloomberg. A story we are watching, Musical.ly, an app for creating and sharing personal music videos, is in talks with media companies, including Viacom and NBC Universal, to make original show programming. This according to people familiar with the matter. If a deal goes through, it may broaden Musical.ly's appeal beyond music, like comedy and sports. Now, speaking of music, a fun fact about our co-host for the hour: apart from being such a big-time tech investor, Roger McNamee is also a rock and roller. His band Moon Alice performs up to 100 concerts a year. I can't believe that. And inventing such applications as Twittercast concerts and Moon Alice Radio on Twitter. Roger McNamee of Elevation Partners, still with me. You play guitar.
And bass.
And bass. Your website lets fans listen to any song or show without an app.
And they get to watch every show. We've got our last 500 concerts are there in streamable
So you
video.
give it all away for free? We
do, because...
Why?
Well, because one, it's really inexpensive to create it, and I'm a tech person. I wanted to see if it could be done. We actually hold what appears to be a relatively fundamental patent on live streaming as it pertains to sending things to smartphones. And at the beginning, it was just, I wanted to see if I could do it. And secondly, it turned out to be a great way to promote the band. And
there's so much going on in music streaming right now. Pandora's looking to sell itself. Spotify's planning for an IPO. iHeartRadio is widely expected to file for bankruptcy. You know, what happens to all of these different players?
Here's what the issue is. For 30 years, the music industry was basically in a defensive crouch, trying to keep its act together as all of these new forms of entertainment, whether they were video games or the internet or smartphones, came in and occupied the time and attention previously occupied by music. And all of that is now behind them. Streaming has reached a point. There's roughly somewhere between 8 and 10% of smartphones have a paid streaming account attached to them. And that is nowhere near the top. My sense is there's a tailwind behind the industry up to maybe 40.
Look at these pictures, Roger.
Well, that's just a couple weeks ago.
Rocking out.
That's just a couple weeks ago in Union Square in San Francisco. But the key thing about this is that I don't see anything slowing it down until you get to about 50% penetration. And they aren't all going to spend $10 a month the way they do in the United States now. Some will be at much lower prices. But the notion that there is a tailwind in music, I mean, that's so foreign. The industry is still in its defensive crouch. So the trick for any startup coming along is, can the industry realize, wait a minute, I don't have to strangle this baby in the crib. You know, at the end of the day, I think that the music streaming thing comes down to Amazon, Apple, Spotify, and then everybody else, I think, has got a problem.
Really?
Well, think about it. For Amazon and Apple, they don't really need to make money from streaming, and obviously Spotify has a market position that I think makes it a survivor. But the three of them are going to have tens, if not hundreds of millions of customer accounts, hundreds of millions of customer accounts over the next few years. It's going to be, they're going to be adding them every quarter at huge rates. And so that's the tailwind. And the question is, what do they do with that? Can they find a way to get back into the front line of entertainment, things that compete with Facebook, things that compete with video streaming, where they're active forms of entertainment?
On that note, I want to take it out. We have 1 minute left. I want to take it out on Facebook versus Snap.
Yeah.
What's your prognosis?
I wouldn't want to be Snap right now. I think that for all intents and purposes, Facebook has this monopoly in social. It's been able to extend a lot of that leverage into Instagram, and they've decided to they're basically copying every single feature of Snap. And I just don't think Snap is prepared culturally inside to defend itself against a company that powerful.
Are you still a Facebook shareholder?
I am still a Facebook shareholder.
Do you think Snap goes away?
It's hard to say. They have a lot of cash now, but I worry deeply about their business. I think it's very hard to sustain growth in a business when you have a really focused, committed, and deep-pocketed monopolist competitor. I just think it's a really hard game.
Fred Wilson told me he thought it was depressing that Facebook had to copy all of Snap's features.
Oh, I agree that it's depressing. I also think this is what happens when you have, when monopolies are okay in the economy. The companies with big economic power get to set the rules. And, we as a country have made that choice. I don't happen to think that's the best thing for innovation. I think Fred's absolutely right. I think it kills startups. And if they kill Snap, it's possible that no other unicorn will get public above its last private round, right? And that should be deeply troubling, right?
Interesting.
I mean,
Certainly.
None of the others has, and Snap's struggling to fight off Facebook. And the market has a very bullish view. I personally do not.
We'll leave it there. Roger McNamee of Elevation Partners, always great to have you here on the show. Thanks for stopping by. Everybody, have a wonderful weekend.
So
we'll
good
see
to
you
have
on
you
Monday.
back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.